So the South African government has called on the global community to support double Olympic champion Caster Semenya on her quest for justice. This follows a decision by the Federal Supreme Court of Appeals that forces Semenya to reduce her naturally occurring levels of testosterone in order to compete in athletics. Now, the World Medical Association has called on doctors and physicians not to implement the World Athletics Regulation, questioning the ethics and potential harm. Professor Julian Savulescu is Uehiro Chair in Practical Ethics at Oxford University. And he says reducing the testosterone levels of intersex female athletes is unfair and based on unfounded science. He joins us now via video link to tell us why. Prof, thanks very much for your time and welcome to the AM report. It appears from your comment that, at least medically speaking, this move is reprehensible, and it certainly raises questions about on what scientific basis it's actually being made. I mean, how is this even allowed to be part of the World Athletics regulations to begin with?
So in the late 1990s, the International Athletic Federation changed from a genetic definition of female, that is if you have a Y chromosome, to a gender-based definition, which means it's female is what you identify as. And Caster Semenya has always identified as a female. She's been raised as a female. She is a female for that purpose. However, she has a disorder of sexual development, which means that her body produces itself testosterone. But in this condition, in the complete version, the receptor for the testosterone is completely abnormal and doesn't recognise it at all. It has zero effect. So you can have a testosterone level 10 times the level of a normal female and it has zero effect. In the partial version, the receptor, the place where the testosterone locks, partially recognises it. So you will have elevated levels, but the effect of that is entirely unclear because testosterone is only half of the story. It's also what it's doing to the receptor. And the figures which have been used in Caster Semenya's case are based on normal females and normal males with normal testosterone receptors. So put simply, we just don't know what the high levels of testosterone are doing in Caster Semenya.
It's interesting, your choice of words are quite telling. I mean, my understanding is that no one actually has the same amount of testosterone in their bodies. Even if you were to look at males specifically, we all have varying levels of testosterone in our body. So when we speak about normal levels in females, what do we mean by that, and who sets that standard?
Well, by studying a population of females, nearly all females will have less than 5, and Caster Semenya's is higher than that. But some females without the Y chromosome also have levels above 5, and they're allowed to compete. So it's also discriminatory in picking out her as opposed to other females who have elevated levels of testosterone. But the key feature of this case is that in her situation, we just don't know what that testosterone is doing. Nobody can quantify how many seconds are related to her having, a very high testosterone level. So, in that case, we ought to err on the side of generosity.
Right. Hypothetically speaking, let's say there was a bearing in her testosterone levels. Why should that, ethically speaking, be a grounds to prevent her from competing in these races? I mean, it certainly does muddy the water, but what are the arguments that you've come across that, ethically speaking, allow for this type of move?
Well, on average, males have a 12% advantage over females, which is largely due to testosterone. The most Caster Semenya's ever run is 2% faster. So the idea is that the testosterone is conferring an advantage, but all of elite sporting performance is due to genetic variations. Some people produce more red blood cells, so they're better at endurance events. That's due to genetic factors. And even if the testosterone had an effect, given that the IAAF decided that Caster Semenya is a female and can compete in female competition, she's just lucky to have a genetic variant that gives her a biological advantage, just like the person who has a mutation in the gene that produces red blood cells has an advantage, and people like that have been allowed to compete and have won gold medals. At the heart of this is the belief that she's not really a female, and I think that's deeply offensive, and also not playing by the IAAF's rules. Yeah. I mean, I can give you an analogy to help you think about it more clearly. There are weight categories in many sports. So, for example, in rowing, you're a lightweight rower if you're under 70 kilos. So let's say you train really hard, you lose weight, you get to 69 kilos and you win 2 Olympic gold medals. And then the rowing authorities come in and say, we're going to change the definition of what it is to be a lightweight rower, and it's now under 65 kilos. And you say, well, genetically, I just can't get down to under 65 kilos because my frame's too big. And they say, sure, you can get under 65 kilos, just chop off one of your legs. And what they're asking Caster Semenya to do is effectively chop off one of her legs.
Quite a strong analogy to make there, and segues quite nicely to the next question I wanted to ask, which is around some of the health considerations to make if she were to take these drugs. I mean, we don't really have much information about how they work. Are you privy to some of the impact that this is likely to have on her body, not only on her testosterone levels, but certainly on other aspects of her health potentially?
Well, she's been asked to take high-dose female hormones, which can be associated with blood clots that move to the lungs that are potentially lethal. So she's being asked to take a medication with not insignificant risks. It can also have effects psychologically on mood, and these are drugs which typically need a medical indication, and she's being asked to essentially hobble or cripple her natural potential for the sake of the IAAF's decisions to change the definition of male and female. And I think she's played by the rules, and the athletics federations haven't.
Yeah, which is quite an interesting position to be in. It does raise questions about the scientific arguments she could raise if this was to land up back in court. I mean, my understanding is that her legal team is still actually weighing their options. Do you think there are sound enough, at least scientific arguments to make if the ethical and moral ones don't hold water? Can she get through on those grounds?
I'm surprised this has gone so far on the science as I've seen it. When I last looked, it was based on one correlational study that was conducted by the IAAF where the results haven't been fully disclosed, and it shows that women with disorders of sexual differentiation are more commonly associated with winning medals. But nobody has done the functional studies of looking at exactly what effect testosterone is having on the receptors in Caster Semenya's case. Nobody's done the science that you need to set the levels of testosterone that are appropriate for her, not for ordinary women with normal testosterone receptors. So I find it staggering that you can cripple somebody's career on the basis of one poorly conducted study with a conflict of interest.
It almost appears to me that the writing is on the wall insofar as this is concerned, which means perhaps we can elevate the conversation to try and find out why it is that it appears Caster Semenya is being targeted. Your thoughts?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons, but one of them may be that I think the sporting authorities are worried about opening the floodgates not just to intersex athletes, which is a very rare condition, and that's what Caster Semenya has, but to transgender athletes who are a different category, because a transgender female who was born biologically male has a normal testosterone receptor and has had a lifetime so far of the influence of testosterone on muscle development and body development. So that's a different category of case. But I think what they're worried about is if they stick to this gender-based definition of female, they're going to have to allow transgender females to compete who will have a significant advantage. But I think you can draw a line between the case like Caster Semenya, where she's grown up as a female, raised as a female, and transgender athletes, and leave that decision till later.
Yeah, it certainly does raise an element of the discussion about our understanding of gender, right? And I think this is growing not only in activist spaces, but certainly in science as well. Are we able to even ascertain the merits of this discussion without understanding fully how gender actually works? Because I certainly get a sense that this is at the heart of this contention. Caster Semenya's gender identity, how we understand gender outside of that, and the bearing this has on one's sporting abilities.
Well, another factor in this debate is, exactly as you say, understanding what gender is. Is it something that we choose, or is it something that we're born with? And again, I think a fear that a number of these authorities have is that, transgender athletes have chosen their gender. I don't know whether that's true or not. But what's absolutely clear is Caster Semenya hasn't chosen her gender. She was born into it and is a different kind of case. But, part of the answer will be, is gender something we're born with, or is it something that we choose, and is that morally relevant? But I think we can put a circle around the intersex cases like Caster Semenya, because she's invested her whole life under one set of rules, and I think it's very unfair to change those midway through her career.
Fascinating facets to this discussion. Thanks very much for coming on. We certainly appreciate your time. Professor Julian Savulescu is Uehiro Chair in Practical Ethics at Oxford University. Prof, thanks very much indeed.